All right, Kevin, back with you for another episode of the Million Dollar Relationships Podcast. And today I am here with Patty Block. Patty, welcome. So awesome to have you on the show.
Thank you. And thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, you bet. I'll tell you, and I need to give a shout out here to Brandon, to Brandon Fong. I don't know how old Brandon is right now, but he's a younger guy. And in fact, I do know when I first met him, he was less than 30. And I remember what an impression that he made on him because he made on me because we met in this mastermind group that's run by this guy, Joe Polish, called Genius Network. And the first morning of one of the meetings that we were at, Brandon and I were seated next to each other. And so him and I started talking, and I find out how old he was. And I was blown away. I'm like, what? I'm like, Brandon, I don't remember what I was doing at your age, but it definitely wasn't this. And so ever since, Brandon and I have been just really close friends. I love Brandon. I love who he is. I love how he shows up. I love the impact that he's making in this world. And Brandon, thank you for connecting Patty and I. Just really appreciate you for that. And so Patty, what I'd like to do is start by just turning it over to you, and we'll set a little bit of context for this conversation. And so I'll have you share a little bit about, the work that you do, who you serve, what inspires you most about the work you do and the impact you're making in the world. And we'll start there, Patty.
Wonderful. I am a business advisor exclusively for women-owned businesses, and those that are expertise based. So I work with a lot of accountants, attorneys, specialty consultants, and the concept is most of these women have come out of a corporate career and want to be their own boss, and they start their companies and they build them, and then they get to a point where they plateau. And so, and they're still often thinking like an employee instead of thinking like a CEO. So I work with women that are building their company. They want to generate more revenue. I am a business advisor and a pricing expert. So that is what I do. I help them generate more revenue with less stress and attract right fit buyers. So the concept there is helping them grow their revenue, not necessarily the size of the company, and help them not feel like the business is a burden. So that's the general basis of what I do. What I have found over the last 17 years that I've been in business, I started this company in 2006. And what I have found is that there are two things where there's a gap. One is I believe every person has a hidden advantage. And that is the basis of a book I wrote. It's called Your Hidden Advantage. And that is to help women unmask and unlock their hidden advantage and generate more revenue and find the right people to work with. But the second gap that I found is in women who want to or have to someday exit their company. So I work with women that are further in their journey, maybe 15 years or more, and they want to build real value as opposed to generating more revenue for the sake of generating revenue. So we're building real business assets and positioning their company so that one day they can exit. And so my private consulting is focused on that group.
Very good. Good. I know for me personally, Patty, Dan Sullivan, the founder of Strategic Coach, talks about this concept called unique ability. And that we all possess this, and I'm assuming this is in alignment with your unfair advantage too, and we all have this, and I know for me, for me personally, I just kind of like shrugged it off for so long. Oh, anybody could do that, and yet that's not true. That and especially in the way that we can do it, and it comes so natural to us that we do tend to kind of shrug this kind of thing off, but yet it is our biggest advantage and stuff. And when we learn how to just really leverage that and make use of that, and I feel, every day for me is an opportunity to learn and discover how I can use my unique ability to make an even bigger impact in the world. And that's kind of my focus all the time, And so I really like how you talked about that stuff. And you're right, when you get to a certain point in business where revenue, when we start out, we need revenue because we need to be able to support the business. And it's nice if we can support ourselves and take care of ourselves too, And but you get to a point when you start figuring things out, and you realize that, like, okay, I got the revenue piece figured out, and making more money is not what inspires me. I want to grow the business. I do. I absolutely want to grow the business, but it's because I want to make a bigger impact. And then when we look at that, revenue is the byproduct, the natural byproduct of doing that. And I love working with entrepreneurs who have got to the point where they're focused on impact, because that conversation is way different, and it's a lot of fun having that conversation. So.
I agree with you completely. And in addition to impact, the clients that I work with care a lot about legacy.
Yeah.
And that they have to have the impact first in present day in order to build their legacy. Yeah. And what I find so often is that especially women think they have nothing to sell when I talk about exit or selling their company. That's what I hear all the time is, oh, well, I have nothing to sell. My business is me. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't have to be that way. So if you would like to build wealth, and which of course is about the impact, because then you're impacting future generations. Yeah. Because you're a role model. And I take my role as a role model very seriously. And all three of my grown children are business owners. And they watched me for all these years. I've been a single mom since my youngest was 2, and he just turned 31.
Wow.
So I've raised my children as a single mom and been a business owner, and they've watched the ups and downs. They didn't always like that I was working all the time, but it was also a necessity for me. And this is the second company that I've owned. The first focused on political consulting and lobbying. Okay. And did that for about 8 years. I loved it. It was fascinating, and I'd never do it again. But I learned a tremendous amount and brought a lot of what I learned in that world into this world where I'm empowering women business owners.
Wow, that's awesome. That's awesome. Well, okay, so now that we've got a little bit of context set here, we'll shift gears. I'm going to reiterate the question for the benefit of the listeners. So, Patty, have you ever been introduced or met a person that completely changed the course of your life or your business, so much so that much of what you have today would not be possible if not for this person? And Patty, I am just really excited to hear your story and your experience around this topic of relationships.
There have been so many people that I have, as I've built my network over the last 35 years or so, I have those in the political arena. I have those, I worked for a nonprofit as a corporate executive. I have those connections. And then, of course, in the small business arena. And there have been so many. You started our interview by talking about Brandon Fong.
Yeah.
And Brandon and I are good friends, and we have helped each other along our journeys. And he really is a remarkable human. And the challenge for me is narrowing it down to one person.
Sure. Yeah.
However, the person that has had the single biggest effect on me as a person and me as a business person is my mother. And my mother she was not a business owner, but my dad was a business owner. He was an orthopedic surgeon who always had his own practice. And my mother managed his office for 45 years. So she was in the business world. She was a role model for me, but where she was a bigger role model. And I love the way my older brother talks about this. So let me preface this by saying that my mom died very suddenly about 6 months ago. And it really was a huge blow to our family. She was the glue that held everyone together. And so we're still adjusting, we're grieving, going through everything that you have to when you lose a parent. And my older brother at her memorial service talked about that mom taught us that it doesn't matter the wrapper, that every human has value, that every human has a story. Yep. And she is going to talk with them long enough to get their story. And that those stories are part of your legacy, which is so interesting because when I started writing Your Hidden Advantage, I realized that a lot of the stories I was including were involving my mom. My mom went to Burning Man in 2014. And there's a wonderful story that ties into business issues, and that's in the book. Okay. I have a concept that I talk about frequently, which is the broken cookie effect. That is a story about growing up and my mom making these fabulous cookies and always eating the broken ones. And that has a business application because that is what I see we as women do in our businesses. We bring that spirit of self-sacrifice into our business, and then everyone around us gets the whole cookie and we live on crumbs. And that really impacts how we grow our business and how we feel about our businesses. So not only has my mom influenced and left that legacy of every person has value, every person has a valuable story to tell, but she also taught me the value of relationships. And I have built a really extensive network of people all over the world that I am so grateful and so proud to say that I know these people, these good, kind humans. And so many of them have had an impact on me and on my business. Yeah. So there's no way I could narrow it down to one. And that's why I want to go back to the source and say that if it hadn't been for my mom teaching me the value of relationships and how to forge those relationships, I know I would not be where I am in my business.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, if you think back over your years in business and the impact that your mom had on you and just really, instilling in you the understanding of how valuable relationships are. I want to just invite you to think, because I love asking this kind of a question because it just really allows us to dig deeper and some good stuff comes up from this. And so if you look at, all that you've done over the course of your business career and all the relationships that you've had, what is one, or you can, if you come up with more than one, that's fine, but I like to just focus on one. What is one thing that has happened where you were able to have a really big impact with somebody else as a result of the relationship that you had with them that never would have happened if not for that relationship?
Where I had an impact on them?
Or others.
Yes. Again, I can think of so many. Yeah. Part of my mission is empowering other women. Mm-hmm. And often women are not great at supporting other women. We somehow feel competitive and envious, sometimes outright jealous. And so sometimes, and if you're a woman listening to this and you've been in a group of other women, you know that sometimes we are less supportive than we should be. And so because I spend time every day supporting other women, making strategic introductions, figuring out, making a mental connection in terms of what I think would be most helpful for the person that I'm visiting with, because I can make those connections, I know they're having a big impact. And I often get that feedback that they've formed some kind of partnership, or they linked that person to a large client, or something that advanced what the other party was doing. And part of that too is because I've been very intentional about surrounding myself with kind, good people. And kindness is a super important thing for me. I want to always treat people with kindness, but I also want that to be part of the ethos, the environment of where I operate. And kindness and compassion is something that we need a lot more of. I think everything that we do in terms of who we trust and what we believe is based on that foundation of kindness and compassion. So that's where I start. And, my clients have all had big impacts from our working together, but I think that's different than the question you're asking, because I'm being compensated for that. Yeah. And there are thousands of situations where I am not being compensated, but I know that there's a connection I can make, or a suggestion, or a different perspective to help the other person have a bigger impact. And to me, that is so rewarding.
Yeah. Yeah. And you're right, and that's where I really have come to understand, especially over the last few years, is that, who we spend our time with matters a lot. And when we align ourselves with other entrepreneurs who we share core values with, that, well, for one, it makes doing business really easy, because when, there's always two trusts that I'm looking for. There's trust in someone's character, that I just know that, they're going to do what is in alignment with who they are. And when I know who they are, because people will always do what is in alignment with who they are, because we can't change who we are who we are. And so they will act accordingly with that. And so, that's character. And when we align ourselves with people who, like I said, we have this shared values with, we have, and there's that trust and character. Then the other thing is trust and competence, where we just know they're world class at what they do, whatever that is. And when those two trusts are in place, all of a sudden now there's zero friction. And when there's zero friction, stuff happens at lightning speed. And if you've never experienced this, because lack of trust is always the thing that slows everything down, but when those two trusts are in place, well, now there is zero friction. There's no friction, and stuff just happens. And that's what I really like facilitating. And when you align yourself with the right people, like you said, and really, whether we're being compensated or not, I do have people that compensate me, because they're like, Kevin, I would really appreciate you being in my corner, taking an active role in focusing your effort on serving me, versus just in doing whatever you do, and if my name comes up, great, but I would like more focused effort than that from you, because I see the value in that, kind of a thing. But when we align ourselves with those kind of people who are, like we talked about before, focused on impact as well, that's what allows us to make our biggest impact. It's who we align ourselves with, And when we align with the right people, we get to make a way bigger impact than we could ever possibly imagine doing on our own.
That is so well said, and absolutely what I believe. When you talk about character, one of the things that I learned from my dad, and my dad was a really tough dad, and he and I butted heads a lot. But you always knew where you stood with my dad, whether you liked it or not. Mm-hmm. You knew where you stood. And one of the things that was true about him is that he said what he meant, and he meant what he said. Mm-hmm. And I also use that as part of my personal motto. I say what I mean, and I mean what I say. So I deliver. And I always deliver excellence. That is part of who I am, and it's part of my character. Mm-hmm. It is also true for my clients, because we are high achieving people, and we're always very focused on delivering excellence. The challenge for women is that we're not always appropriately compensated for that. And that's because we set our prices artificially low, because there's fear underneath that. So I can say the same thing about my clients and my colleagues. They say what they mean, and they mean what they say, and they really deliver. Mm-hmm. And one of the problems that we run into, especially in the business community, are people who don't deliver, who are all talk. In Texas, we call that all hat and no cattle. And I'm based in Houston, Texas. And that all hat and no cattle is something I'm very sensitive to. And if you've ever had the situation where somebody said they'll make an introduction for you and then they don't, mm-hmm. or they'll help you with something and then you don't hear from them again, those are people I try to remove from my environment, mm-hmm. because they don't share that same character. Mm-hmm. And again, it's not to say they're bad people. It's not to say there's anything wrong. It's that they don't fit with my ethos and what I think is important. And so I focus on surrounding myself with the people who say what they mean and mean what they say. And I trust that they will deliver. Yeah. And there is never a time that I don't deliver, right? I never say I'm going to make an introduction and then I don't do it. And that is part of what people come to expect from me and what I expect from others. Yeah. So, that goes back to your comments about character, about trust, and about who, not just that we can achieve more. We definitely can achieve more together. And going back to my earlier point of women supporting women, we need to be much more attuned to that. We need to get better at it, and we need to be more consistent and take away some of that competitive nonsense and really support each other, because often we're not talking about ourselves. We're not speaking up for ourselves. And so who's going to advocate for us other than other women? Yeah. Right? Yeah. And it's easier to say nice things about someone else than it is for us to say nice things about ourselves. Yeah. So that's something I feel really strongly about, that if I make an introduction for a woman colleague or perhaps a client, and they have some big outcome, big impact, I am thrilled. I'm not jealous, angry, envious. I'm none of those things. I am so thrilled because I helped that happen. Yeah. And I delivered on what I promised.
Yeah. 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 That's one of the other things that Dan Sullivan talks about. I was in strategic coach for 7 years, and for 4 of those years I was in one of Dan's groups, and one of the things that he talks about is our word, and that that we want to be known for just honoring our word, doing what we say we're going to do. And when and it's not so much about reputation, although that will play into that, but it's just really about how do we want to show up. I for one, I want people knowing that Kevin is a guy who honors his word. That if Kevin says he's going to do something, there is no question of will he do it. He will do it. And so if anybody's ever, like you said, talking about me when I'm not present, that's the kind of stuff that I want them saying. And so therefore, I need to just show up that way. And I say need, the reality is I want to show up that way because I want to attract people into my life that show up the same way, that we have shared core values when it comes to this is how we treat relationships. This is for one, that relationships are a very high priority, and that this is my process. This is how I view relationships. This is how I interact and handle relationships in my life. And when, like, once again, it comes down to that whole thing of alignment, and that when we're just in alignment with like-minded people, and there are the trust in both character and competence, it just makes everything really, really easy.
And fun.
Yeah, and you bet. It's incredibly, it's fun, it's rewarding, it's profitable, it's all of that. And so, well, Patty, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to have this conversation. For anybody that's listening to this going, wow, Kevin, I really like Patty. I like what she stands for. How can they find out more about what you're doing? And if you want to talk about your book, great. Maybe people might be curious about your book because you mentioned that and stuff too.
Wonderful. Thank you. So if you're interested in the book, if you'll go to yourhiddenadvantage.com,
okay,
there are several bonuses that are companion pieces to the book, and those are free. And one of them is a video training that you might be interested in. And that's yourhiddenadvantage.com. And you can reach out to me through LinkedIn. It's Patty with a Y, or through my website. And also, I have an assessment. If you've been in business for a while and you're starting to think about exit, whether it's voluntary or not, and I think one of the biggest fears as we get older is that we'll get sick, or a family member will get sick, and we'll have to step away from our business. And how can we do that without losing the business? So I have an assessment called the Exit Readiness Index, and you can find that at she-exits.com, she-exits.com. And that will give you some insights as to where you are in terms of being ready to exit and where some of the gaps may be.
Very good. Very good. Well, I'll make sure that we include those resources with the show notes and stuff when we do that. And Patty, is any last thing that you feel led to share before we call it a wrap today?
Well, thank you for inviting me, for having this very meaningful conversation. I have done, you mentioned before we got started, I've done a lot of interviews, and not that many of them are deep, meaningful conversations. And they're not necessarily meant to be, right? Sure. So they focus on helping me promote myself, which I'm very grateful for. And they are interesting conversations, but often not as deep as the one we've just had. And I really appreciate that. And the opportunity to talk about things that are important to me that in many ways have nothing to do with business. They have impacted my business, and especially what I've learned from my mom. But it's not, you made a comment a minute ago about revenue as a byproduct of And I think of it too. I think of it as a side effect of a job well done.
Yeah.
And we're in this to earn money. That's why we have a business instead of a hobby. However, there are so many different ways we can go about doing that. And we don't have to compromise our ethics or our character in order to be very successful.
Yeah.
And that is a message I think we need to hear more frequently and believe it and talk to people who have experienced it like you and I have.
Yeah. 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 Well, I'll tell you, I really appreciate you kind of being a mirror, Patty, and pointing it back in this direction, because I have been I joined my very first mastermind group in 1997, and man, that's a 26 years. and not a year has gone by that I have not been in at least one mastermind group. There was a 3-year stretch where I invested over 200,000 a year, not counting travel, just in mastermind group, investments. And I can tell you that a lot of those groups, for whatever reason, you get a lot of entrepreneurs in groups, and it becomes more about putting on this mask, acting like we have our act all together, and showing up as the best version of ourselves that people think others want to see. And the challenge with that is that, here's the thing. No matter how successful, and I have been really blessed that I get to work with some pretty amazing entrepreneurs who are doing some pretty big things in this world. And I can tell you that no matter how successful they are, no matter how big their business is, no matter how great things look from the outside looking in, that, they are really good at this certain thing or things that they do. They're world class at that. But all this other stuff, they're not at all. And the bigger their business grows, the bigger problems that they have, and the more valuable it is for them to solve those problems quickly and efficiently. And really what it comes down to is the bigger an entrepreneur grows their business, the more valuable it is their problems, and also the smaller their circle becomes, where it's people that they can truly trust and confide in. And when we can be that trusted person for them, they place so much value in us. And of course, that also comes with a very big responsibility on our end too, at the same exact time, but when we can hold that spot for them and just, give them the gift of feeling seen, heard, and understood, which is something few people get to experience. We get to make quite an impact in this world. We get to make, and for me, I don't give a dang if I want to make a big impact, and I don't care one bit if all those people know that I ever existed as a piece of that. I don't even care, because I know, and that's all I need. I know, and that is exciting to me. That is exciting to put those pieces together and make those connections and facilitate those relationships that are leading to really big impact being made. And that's what jazzes me. I just get so excited by that. And like we talk about, revenue is the byproduct of that. When we do that with the right people, the revenue just comes, And so, kudos to you, Patty, for what you're doing. And I know you mentioned that sometimes women are not necessarily supportive of other women, but when we get to this place where we realize, you know what, there's plenty to go around. There's more than enough to go around. And when we collaborate and co-create together, we can accomplish so much more together than we ever could on our own, you know. And so for you, kind of facilitating that, that's a pretty awesome thing. That's a pretty awesome thing. So
Thank you. And it feels awesome. And it is fun and exciting. And again, those are all things that I watched from my mom as I was growing up, that the depth of relationships she had, the kindness, she always led with kindness. She was always she was helping people. She was advising them. She was guiding and collecting people everywhere she went. She would literally act as if she had adopted people. And that, and that was talked about always, but certainly at her memorial service, that each one of her kids and several of her grandchildren spoke, and we all said similar things without having talked to each other first.
Yeah.
And we all felt the same way, and we all realized that we had hit the mom jackpot, and that what she had taught us in so many ways has influenced us and our children. And now I have a grandchild. Wow. And it's my first grandchild, so I'm very excited. And in fact, he's named after my mom.
Wow, that's awesome.
Which is a very special tribute. And so I miss my mom a lot, and I'm extremely grateful for what she has taught me, and especially about building relationships and the importance and the level of respect of how you treat others. That definitely came from my mom.
Yeah, yeah. Well, Patty, once again, thank you so much for taking the time to have this conversation today. Really appreciate it. And I am excited to share this with a whole lot of entrepreneurs. So thanks again.
Thank you.